I used to be Chair of Public Health Wales until about, I don't know. My name is Mansell Aylward, but much of my time had been involved away from my home in Wales, in London for more than 20 years, and indeed propagating the psychosocial paradigm, which had fallen into, well, not into disrepute, but had fallen by the wayside since it was first introduced in 1960s. When I was Chief Medical Officer in London in the early 90s, I noticed that many of the people who were on benefits, not just incapacity benefits or invalidity benefit then, were suffering from what were really common health problems, not major things. 60% of people had back problems. They would not believe that they were mentally ill because they weren't. Why people don't go to work, it was because of their beliefs and the attitudes and the environment. And at the heart of it all is poverty. There's much more to do with the personal psychological attitudes of people and their beliefs. And we tackled those. Won't go into it, but that was part of my work when I came back to Cardiff. Of the biopsychosocial model, what I realised that the single most important reason why people have common health problems. When I was Chief Medical Officer in London in the early 90s, empathy, compassion, this thing came along called post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't believe in post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a nonsense. It was made up by the Americans so that the veterans coming back from war could get free health care and welfare because they had a diagnosis. So unless you were of a particular social standing, life was short, brutal and nasty. Now somebody famous said that, but I can't remember who they were. But what I want to do is to give you a little what I call homily. The characteristic that distinguishes Homo sapiens sapiens from Homo sapiens is known to have had what's called reflective consciousness. That person knew that they knew, were aware of their surroundings, could think of the future and plan for the future. And they wondered why there was a moon that went one way and a sun that went the other, went up and down, and there were seasons, and they wondered where the wind came from. Group feeling. They wondered, why are we here? And there are paintings left on caves which demonstrate the sort of thought process they've had. Pretty stiff. Being anxious, being fearful, being timid, worrying, and being less than bold were the single important characteristics in the mind of Homo sapiens sapiens. Why? Because if your didn't have those characteristics, one false step and you were dead. So it isn't a concern of ours to worry about being depressed or anxious or worried, because if we weren't worried, timid, and perhaps fierce, afraid, we wouldn't be here. Or if we were, we wouldn't have been as successful as we should have been. We wouldn't have been as successful as we should have been. Now, alongside that, and this is my theory, so, if we've got a good job, if we're contributing to society, it makes us have greater self-esteem. People who work longer in good jobs live longer. Survival of the group. Group feeling was not survival of the fittest, which is what Darwin pronounces, and it is correct in the sense of what we mean by fit, running away from things and all the things that we think of as survival of the fittest. It may have been appropriate for other animals, people who think. But actually, there's more and more evidence now that our survival in early species and in other animals, higher animals, was actually because of group survival. Although we had these individual characteristics which helped us survive as individuals, we survived, as did many of the higher mammals, because of group. I was recently involved with a film that was shown on television. I had collaborated on another film with him. That's another element of reflective consciousness. collaboration and cooperation were much more important, and particularly if the group all possessed the same characteristics of being anxious, worried and timid. Group survival, collaboration, group feeling, and considering the group as an extended family. And thereby, empathy, compassion and involvement with the group was very important. And one of the involvements that we know helps us all, that being in work. Work. All the evidence shows that there's not been much change in happiness since we all had a welfare state, since we all had a living wage. That's what made people happy and contented, because they had time. With a late friend, professor of mine called Gordon Waddell, who wrote a book called The Back Pain. Everybody in Great Britain would be off work, and we looked at people in the street, and we interviewed people in the street, and at the heart of it all is poverty. And that is shared by a big friend of mine who may know and came to talk to us last week, is Sir Michael Marmot. Has anybody not heard of Michael Marmot? Yeah, well, you know, he believes that too. What does evidence-based practice really mean when thinking about mental health at work? Now, there we are. I give you a good introduction to that, didn't I?
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I kind of struggled to follow that, to be honest. But, you know, I'll try. I'm a psychologist. There are many different types of psychologists, but I just collapse them all into one group, really. And as a result...